This PowerPoint will share aggregate findings from the General Education Competency Assessment for Critical and Creative Thinking from the 2012 to 2013 academic year through the 2014 to 2015 academic year. Given that sample sizes for many of the assessment years are small, we have aggregated the results to better observe trends over time for student learning outcomes for general education competencies. In this PowerPoint, we will describe critical and creative thinking competencies as 2 of the 5 general education competencies measured at NC State and explain the process through which they were identified. Describe the overarching assessment processes for critical and creative thinking competency outcome assessment. Highlight aggregate results for critical and creative thinking competencies. Discuss future directions for critical and creative thinking. Here you can see an overview of where, when, and how general education competency outcomes are assessed at NC State. This information is also available on the NC State Office of Assessment website. Critical and creative thinking were selected as general education competencies by a diverse faculty team following the processes previously discussed regarding general education outcome selection. They were also chosen as NC State's Quality Enhancement Plan. In this section, we will discuss critical and creative thinking assessment as general education competencies and assessment of critical and creative thinking as part of the university's Quality Enhancement Plan. Critical thinking is the active, persistent, and careful consideration of a belief or form of knowledge, the grounds that support it, and the conclusions that follow. It involves analyzing and evaluating one's own thinking and that of others. In the context of college teaching and learning, critical thinking deliberately and actively engages students in raising vital questions and problems and formulating these clearly and precisely, gathering and assessing relevant information and using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively, reaching well-reasoned conclusions and solutions and testing them against relevant criteria and standards, openly considering alternative systems of thought, and effectively communicating to others the analysis of and proposed solutions to complex challenges. Creative thinking is the generation of new ideas within or across disciplines. It draws upon or breaks rules and procedures in those disciplines and actively engages students in bringing together existing ideas into new configuration, developing new properties or possibilities for something that already exists, and discovering or imagining something entirely new. Standards for judging creative thinking include originality, appropriateness, flexibility, and contribution to the domain. Critical thinking is measured for general education competency assessment and also as part of our QEP. Critical thinking is measured in multiple ways, such as standardized assessments such as the Critical Thinking Assessment Test, or CAT, and the ETS Proficiency Profile. It is also measured through application of rubrics to student products. It is also measured using indirect evidence from student responses to surveys, such as the NC State sophomore and senior surveys, which contain questions related to students' beliefs about the importance of critical thinking skills, the alumni survey, which contains questions related to alumni's ability related to critical thinking, and the National Survey of Student Engagement, which contains questions related to student opportunities to engage in critical thinking on campus. For general education assessment, the CAT test was administered to first years in 2013 and 2014 in order to be able to compare trends among the two groups. First year students were recruited through HES courses, similar to recruitment for ETS Proficiency Profile, which allowed for a large and representative sample. Seniors were recruited through capstone and senior level courses, which were strategically selected to attempt to have a representative sample. In this case, we were able to reach target numbers with cooperation of faculty teaching senior and capstone level courses. From the overall population, a random sample of tests were selected and scored by faculty who had been trained following procedures outlined by the test developers. Analysis of the data suggests that seniors' critical thinking score on the CAT test was roughly equivalent to the national average, and seniors scored higher on average than first years pre-score. First years took the assessment at the beginning of their first term and again at the end of their first term. Factors there tended to be similar patterns of strengths and areas for improvement among both first years and a higher test score, and effort. Effort was assessed using the Student Opinion Survey, Sundre and Moore 2002, to gauge how much effort students put into the test. The more effort students reported putting into the assessment, the higher their scores. There tended to be similar patterns of strengths and areas for improvement among both first years and seniors. For the general education competency assessment, we also use the ETS Proficiency Profile as a supplementary measure of critical thinking. The third level of the reading section of the ETS proficiency profile, aggregate data from 2013 to 2015 is meant to assess critical thinking. Of the ETS proficiency looking profile, at aggregate data from 2013 to 2015 administrations of the ETS the marginally proficient or proficient, found that only 32.1% of seniors are marginally proficient or proficient level, and 40.3% of seniors are marginally proficient or proficient.
Now we will turn our attention to the assessment of critical and creative thinking as part of the QEP. As previously noted, critical and creative thinking were selected as the university's QEP requirement for institutional accreditation through SAC-COC. The aim of the QEP program is to improve students' critical and creative thinking through enhanced teaching strategies. The first 2 years have focused exclusively on first-year students, and the last 3 years will shift to a longitudinal look of long-term development within selected disciplines. The CAT test is used in QEP assessments of critical and creative thinking and were administered to 245 new first-year students in the fall of 2014 and 512 students in the fall of 2015. New freshmen were given the pre-test during the first 2 weeks of the semester and then given the post-test after Thanksgiving at the end of the term. Additional assessments include rubrics which faculty rate student performances on a common assignment in freshman-level courses. A longitudinal analysis of this data will occur at the end of the 3-year cycle for the selected disciplines, and results will be shared. In this presentation, we will focus on findings from the initial administration of the CAT test to first-year students, with 2014 to 2015 in the aggregate. Looking at results from first-year students' CAT test scores from the fall of 2014 and fall of 2015, it appears that the Think intervention and teaching strategies seem to be taking effect. We have seen improvement in the second year as the training of faculty seems to have become more systematic and effective. Statistically significant pre-post critical thinking gains were observed for NC State first-year students participating in the QEP Think program using the critical thinking assessment test. The gains were observed within the single-term timeframe of fall of 2015 and ranged from small to moderate in effect size ranges. The gains were greater in the fall of 2015, the second cycle, than in fall of 2014, the first cycle. NC State will continue to assess critical and creative thinking as the QEP is integrated vertically across campus.
First, looking at tables 1 and 2, the 2010 NC State sophomore and senior surveys, which asked respondents about the extent to which they believe their college experiences had contributed to skills related to critical thinking, we see that the mean scores for sophomores tended to indicate that their college experiences had somewhat contributed to the development of dimensions of critical thinking, while the mean scores go up for seniors, who tend to indicate an increased contribution to the importance of these skills, with means closer to very much. Note that the questions asked in the 2010 and 2013 surveys differed. Next, looking at the alumni surveys, alumni were asked how satisfied they were that their undergraduate education at NC State met each goal on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being very dissatisfied and 5 being very satisfied. For the questions with asterisks beside them, alumni were asked, how well do you feel you were prepared in each area through your program of study at NC State, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being poor and 5 being excellent. On the question set for 2009, which differs from the questions asked in 2013, looking at the means for the first 5 questions, which are shaded in gray, mean scores suggest that respondents felt somewhat satisfied with their education meeting their goals in these areas. Looking at the mean scores for the remaining questions from 2009, which use a different scale, mean scores suggest that respondents felt that their preparation in these areas was generally good. Looking at the second table with responses from 2012, we see that respondents tended to score that their preparation in these areas was average. Next, looking at the National Survey of Student Engagement, in the first block of questions, respondents are asked to assess how often in the current school year they had engaged in activities listed here which are tied to critical thinking on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being never and 4 being very often. Mean scores suggest that students feel they engage in these activities somewhat regularly, with mean scores hovering around 3, which is often. In the second block of questions, respondents were asked on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being very little and 4 being very much, how much they felt their experiences at NC State contributed to their knowledge, skills, and personal development in the following areas: thinking critically and analytically, and solving complex real-world problems. Mean scores suggest that students feel that NC State contributes quite a bit to their knowledge, skills, and personal development in these areas. From our analysis of aggregate data from each of the competencies and survey data, we will continue to focus on critical thinking of our QEP, as evidence suggests that we have room for improvement in this area. This fall, we expect to receive results from the UNC GA Heightened Critical Thinking Assessment, as we will consider these results as well in our big picture analysis of critical thinking. Additionally, moving forward, we will continue to engage in collaboration with faculty and programs across campus in order to augment general education competency data collection and student participation at NC State. For more information about the General Education Competency Assessment process, please visit our website. Results from surveys included in this presentation, such as the sophomore, senior, and alumni surveys and the National Survey of Student Engagement, can be found on the website of the NC State Office of Institutional Research and Planning. For other questions or to provide feedback, please email us at dasa-assessment@ncsu.edu.